Hi, Sage here with Hippie from the 49th and our Sunday Bible review. I'm a little late again, I'm still getting caught up. Today, we're going to explore Genesis 17 through 25. Covenants, divine tests, and the stories that shape families and nations. Genesis 17 looks boring on the surface names, rules, promises. But this chapter is where religion stops being a story and becomes a system. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. Genesis 17:4-5. And later his wife's name is changed to Sarah. And she will bear him a son, and they shall name him Isaac. In the ancient world, changing someone's name meant changing their identity and role. This is not personal, it's political. God isn't blessing Abraham for his happiness. God is assigning him a function. In the ancient world, families were nations. There were no countries yet, only bloodlines, tribes, and descendants. So when the Bible says, Father of nations, it means future land claims, future power, and future ownership. This is where things get uncomfortable and important. Circumcision is not about spirituality. It is about permanent marking, a physical sign that cannot be removed, passed from father to son, and endorsed or enforced on children without consent. This is identity carved into the body. Because control of the body means control of inheritance, sexuality, lineage, and legitimacy. This is where religion moves into biological ownership. And this is something that is still practiced today. For some, it's religious reasons. For some, it's health reasons. And some just call it pure mutilation. Abraham receives land and nations. Sarah receives a role, mother of the heir. Her value is now reproductive. Ishmael is not rejected. God says Ishmael will be blessed, fruitful, and the father of 12 rulers. But Isaac is chosen for inheritance. This is not about love, it's about which lineage gets the land. This chapter isn't teaching morality. This is where faith becomes organized. And once faith becomes organized, it starts deciding who belongs and who does not. If this feels uncomfortable, that's okay. Genesis is not trying to inspire us here. It's showing us how systems begin. Throughout history, we see this with territorial conflict. From Genesis to today, systems, religious, political, or national use rules, rituals, and claims to assert power. Understanding the history of these practices helps us see why people fight over identity and land. Genesis 18 opens strangely. 3 visitors arrive at Abraham's tent, and at first, nothing dramatic happens. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. Genesis 18:1-2. The text is deliberately vague. They are called 3 men angels, and at times, God. This isn't confusion, it's symbolism. In ancient storytelling, divine presence often arrives disguised as strangers. This story is not about miracles, it's about hospitality. Abraham feeds them, welcomes them, and protects them. In the ancient world, how you treated strangers revealed your morality. Then the tone changes. The visitors say, Sodom and Gomorrah are wicked. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, says the Bible. This is the first time in the Bible that a city is judged and not a person. Do you notice what's missing? The text doesn't list crimes yet. It doesn't describe behavior. It speaks of outcry. That word suggests exploitation, injustice, and violence abuse of the vulnerable. This isn't about individual sin, it's about systemic harm. This is the most important moment in the chapter. Abraham argues with God. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He asked. This is a radical. A human challenges divine judgment. This is the first time in the Bible where God listens, God negotiates, and God considers mercy based on justice. Abraham becomes an advocate, not for himself, but for strangers. This is not about visitors or miracles. It's about hospitality versus exploitation, collective responsibility, and whether power listens when challenged. This chapter asks a hard question. If justice becomes normal in a society, how many innocent people justify saving it? Sound familiar? And more importantly, who gets to ask that question? This moment matters because it shows faith is not obedience without thought. It's courage to question power. How you treated strangers revealed your morality. So in today's world, think about that. How you treat strangers, immigrants, the homeless, or people of a different faith. If we look at what is happening in the U.S., ICE agents terrorizing citizens, has this injustice become normal? No. And people are speaking out, just as Abraham did, in protest for the innocent. Even in biblical times, morality and power were intertwined. Speaking up and negotiating, like Abraham did, remains a critical part of how societies balance justice, mercy, and authority today. Genesis 19 is not a comfortable chapter either, and it's not meant to be. Two messengers arrived in Sodom and stayed with Lot. Almost immediately, the men of the city surround the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may have sex with them." Genesis 19:5. This is not a story about sex. This is a story about power through violence. In the ancient world, sexual violence was used to dominate outsiders, humiliate strangers, and enforce control. This is about a society where exploitation has become normal. The angels intervened. The attackers were struck blind. Lot is told to take his family and leave. The city is beyond repair. We must destroy it. This mirrors Genesis 6. Once again, violence has reached a tipping point. As they flee, Lot's wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. This is not about curiosity. Looking back symbolizes attachment to a broken world, grief for a life built inside corruption, and reluctance to let go. She doesn't die because she turns her head. She dies because she cannot leave the old world behind. Lot and his daughters flee to the mountains. They believe they are the last humans left. There were no men in sight. So the daughters got their father drunk and laid with him, resulting in both producing sons. In the ancient world, lineage meant survival. Without sons, a family ended. There were no social systems, no safety nets. The daughters make a desperate decision to continue the family line. This is not portrayed as righteous. It is portrayed as tragic. The Bible does not hide human brokenness. This chapter shows what happens after collapse. Fear replaces morality, survival overrides ethics, and trauma distorts judgment. This is not a morality tale about punishment. It is a warning about societies where violence is normalized, strangers are unsafe, and power goes unchecked. Sound familiar? Sodom is not destroyed because people are flawed. It is destroyed because cruelty became the system. And when systems collapse, people do things they never imagined they were capable of. This chapter doesn't ask us to judge these people. It asks us, what kind of world creates this kind of desperation? Good question. And to apply this to today's world, all one has to do is read a newspaper. Genesis 20 feels familiar. Abraham travels again. A king takes Sarah again. And once again, Abraham says, "She is my sister." And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." Then Amalek, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. Genesis 22. This already happened in Egypt. That's not a mistake, it's a pattern. In the ancient world, women were political assets, marriage meant alliances, and beauty meant danger. Abraham fears being killed so another man can take his wife, so he gives up the truth to save himself. This is important. Amalek is not portrayed as evil. He acts within the customs of the time. God intervenes, not because Abraham is righteous, but because Sarah is part of the promise. God doesn't threaten Abraham. God threatens the king. Power protects power. Once again, Sarah has no voice in this story. Her body carries the promise. Her consent is never asked. This is not love. This is survival. This is patriarchy functioning normally. Sarah is returned. Amalek gives silver, livestock, and food. This is compensation, not justice. Genesis 20 isn't about morality. It's about how fear shapes decisions, how women become collateral, and how power negotiates with power. This chapter shows us that being chosen does not mean being ethical, and being foreign does not mean being wicked. Something to think about. Sometimes, so-called pagan king behaves more justly than the man of faith. And yet, despite all this, the promise continues. Because Genesis is not telling us who is good, It's showing us how history actually unfolds. The story reminds us that authority without accountability preys on the weak. When we see power used unjustly today, we must speak out, just as divine morality intervened in Abraham and Sarah's time. If you are still following along, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It means so much to us. And let me know what you think in the comments. Genesis 21 finally delivers the promise. Isaac is born. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Genesis 21:2. This is the child the covenant has been waiting for. But notice something? The promise arrives, and immediately conflict follows. Sarah looks at Ishmael, the son born first, and sees a threat. This is not protection. This is inheritance control. Sarah is not acting out of faith. She is acting out of greed and fear. In the ancient world, inheritance meant survival, land meant power, and sons meant legacy. This is the moment where chosen lineage overrides compassion. Hagar and Ishmael are sent into the wilderness with limited supplies. This is abandonment. God hears Ishmael's cries and lifts him up to his mother and sends them in the right direction. They settle near Beersheba. Ishmael grows up in the wilderness. He becomes a skilled archer. This is not failure. This is adoption. God says Ishmael will become a great nation too. Not chosen for the land, but not forgotten. Then the story shifts again. Abraham and Amalek make a treaty. Wells are negotiated. Boundaries are drawn. This is the real transition. Genesis moves from divine promises to political agreements. God fades into the background. Human systems take over. Genesis 21 teaches us promises create competition. Faith doesn't prevent cruelty, and survival often belongs to those who are pushed aside. Ishmael survives without inheritance. Isaac inherits, but lives inside power. Both are blessed. Both are wounded. And the conflict between them doesn't end here. This chapter isn't about birth. It's about who gets written into history and who gets pushed into the margins. It's a window into how societies choose heroes, how power and inheritance shape history, and why we need to look beyond the text, to the art, to culture and archaeology, to understand the full human story. Genesis 22 is one of the most disturbing stories in the Bible. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. Take your son, your only son Isaac, who you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Genesis 22, 1-2. This story is not meant to be comforting. It reflects a world where child sacrifice existed, blood rituals were common, and gods were believed to demand proof of loyalty. Abraham and Isaac travel to the mountain together. Isaac carries the wood, Abraham carries the knife. This silence in the story is intentional. It's psychological tension. In Abraham's world, God's tested devotion through sacrifice. So this command does not shock him, but it should shock us. At the last moment, an angel stops Abraham. A ram is provided instead. This moment is not about obedience, it's about interruption. This is the Bible saying, this is where it stops. The ram replaces the child. This marks a shift away from human sacrifice and toward symbolic offerings. This is evolution, not perfection. Genesis 22 is not telling us to obey blindly. It is wrestling with a terrifying question. What happens when authority demands harm? Think about it. Does it sound familiar? I do not agree with blood sacrifice, and neither does this story, not by the end. They return to Beersheba. Life continues, but something has changed. Faith is no longer proven by killing. It is proven by stopping. This chapter is not about a loving God demanding blood. It's about humanity learning, slowly and painfully, that violence is not devotion. Genesis doesn't show us a perfect God. It shows us humans outgrowing old ideas. To bring this into today's world, what happens when authority demands harm? Authority may demand obedience, but conscience and compassion guide ethical action. Questioning orders, advocating for the innocent, and protecting the vulnerable is timeless wisdom. Well, I don't know about you, but I have asked that question many times in the past year. Have you? Genesis 23 slows everything down. No miracles, no angels, no drama. Sarah dies. She died at Kiriath Arba in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Genesis 23:2. Sarah, the mother of the promise, dies. And for the first time in Genesis, the story is not about birth, but about death and memory. This chapter is not about grief, it's about land ownership. Abraham buys a burial plot from the Hittites, not a gift, not as charity, but as a legal transaction. This is deliberate. In the ancient world, burial land meant belonging. Ancestors anchored claims to territory, and graves created permanence. By burying Sarah here, Abraham plants the family's first permanent claim to Canaan. Here, faith is expressed through contracts and witnesses. Genesis 23 teaches us belonging is negotiated, land is claimed through memory, and power begins quietly, not dramatically. Sarah's body becomes the first permanent marker in the land. Before kingdoms, before temples, before wars, there was a grave. Genesis reminds us that history isn't only written by victories. It's written by who is remembered and where they are laid to rest. Think about this today. It reminds us that land is tied to memory, faith, and people. When land is taken by force, it erases more than soil. It erases ancestry, heritage, and sacred bonds. Today we must remember whose stories lie beneath our streets and cities. In Genesis 24, Abraham is old and wants Isaac's wife to come from his own people, not the Canaanites. He sends a trusted servant back to Haran, his homeland. The servant prays for a sign. Rebekah appears, shows generosity, and is identified as family, granddaughter of Abraham's brother, Nahor. She agrees to leave her home immediately. Isaac and Rebekah marry. This chapter is about control, bloodlines, and legacy. You can pull a few strong themes from this. Firstly, Abraham insists Isaac marry within the family. This is the beginning of tribal identity, not just faith, but lineage. It plants the seed for later obsession with chosen people. Secondly, Rebekah doesn't choose Isaac. Negotiations happen between men. Her value is youth, fertility, and obedience. Remember, at this time, girls were married around the age of 12 or 13. She's transferred like an inheritance. Thirdly, the servant prays. The first suitable woman fulfills the checklist. Was this divine intervention or people interpreting coincidence as God's will? Fourthly, Rebekah never sees her family again. This mirrors Abraham leaving Haran. The story reinforces obedience over attachment. This isn't a love story. It's a story about legacy, bloodlines, and who gets to belong. What we call marriage wasn't love, rings, or vows. It was a practical, social, and divine arrangement, ensuring the promise survived through the next generation. How far have we really come when women are still seen as property in some places or forced into lives and choices that aren't of their own? In Genesis 25, Abraham passes away at an old age. His legacy continues through his sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Burial takes place in the family tomb at Hebron. Ishmael has 12 sons who become rulers. They live in lands near Egypt, from Havilah to Shen. This shows how the promise of God to Abraham extends beyond Isaac, lineage and tribes spread. Isaac and Rebekah have twins, Esau and Jacob. Conflict starts in the womb. Jacob holding Esau's heel at the time of delivery. Esau grows into a skilled hunter. Jacob stays home. The theme of birthright and inheritance emerges. Esau sells his birthright to Jacob for food because he despises his birthright. Inheritance and favoritism shows early human focus on power, property, and family advantage. Lineage and destiny. Even from birth, twins represent conflicting paths and personality. Human nature, greed, impatience, and desire for immediate satisfaction. Even today, how we resolve disputes within families or groups shape the next generation. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's review. And until next time, be kind, stay groovy. Peace and love, y'all.